Welcome to Expedition Networking, a special segment of the Networking RX podcast. I'm Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and your host for this program. For those of you who are familiar, on the Networking RX podcast, we share information and have conversations with experts, such as authors, researchers, and social scientists. And all of these programs are aimed at helping you learn how to become better at building professional relationships and understanding why they work. In this Expedition Networking segment, however, we're going to bring on successful entrepreneurs and unique professionals and explore their networking adventure and learn how they used relationships to create lasting success. Today on Expedition Networking, we have Lisa Luckett, a social visionary, an activist for kindness, and an advocate for gaining wisdom by experiencing the life head on. Her mantra, choose courage, is the foundation of her social vision, reminding us that we're strong and resilient with the choice in how we live our lives. She's an entrepreneur, coach, speaker, author, and mother of 3 young adults, great kids. And she's a 9/11 widow, single mother, breast cancer survivor. She knows the value of life's struggles and sees the gift, or what we'll call the silver lining, in every situation. Lisa lives in the moment, watching as life unfolds, letting go of her attachment to the outcome. She recognizes that life's lessons and grace lie within the struggle. She's the voice of reason amidst chaos, and for the last 20 years, and today is September 10th, 2021, which is 20 years since the 9/11 tragedy. Tomorrow will be the anniversary. But for the past 20 years, she's extensively studied and analyzed the human condition from the macro to the micro to the global, from the local to the global, personal to cultural. And she brings her vast experience and the wisdom gained from delving in and dissecting personal trauma events, life situations, to better understand her world and the people who live in it. And this has led to a deep and exponential understanding of our American culture, our global neighbors, and the possible trajectories for our future. With a decade by decade analysis of social trends and behaviors, we can better understand our current social environment and project our potential future options. It's our choice, as she'll say. We will be brilliant or we will be broken. Lisa is the author of an award-winning book called The Light in 9/11, Shocked by Kindness, Healed by Love, which she released in 2018. She's been actually writing it for years, it seems like. Anyhow, Lisa, welcome to the program.
Well, how are you, Frank? Thank you so much for having me.
I'm doing well. Just to let our listeners know, I was introduced to Lisa last summer in 2020 by our friend, Casey Haston, who's down in Dallas. And I remember Casey calling me or emailing me and said, "You've got to meet this woman. She's in my coaching class. She's amazing. She's written this book. You got to read this book." And I got the book and it was great. I mean, I just kind of, I do read a lot. But I just sat there. It was a summer day and kind of worked through it. And interestingly enough, our sons went to college together. They both attended Ohio Wesleyan University. And I'm reading the book and reading that her husband, who perished on 9/11, was a soccer player at Ohio Wesleyan University. My son is a soccer player at Ohio Wesleyan University. All these little things are kind of coming together because my son said, "Yeah, I know Billy Luckett," and every 9/11, Jay Martin, who's the coach, stops the team and they have a moment of silence for Teddy. And there was another individual as well. And it was just really kind of weird, just poking my head out in the backyard saying, "Chase, do you know Billy Luckett?" "Oh yeah, I know Billy." So it's kind of funny. So we were destined to connect. There are no coincidences, right?
There are no coincidences whatsoever. And I just want to thank you for that incredible introduction. Yes, I mean, it all circles back to all the good people already know each other, even if they haven't yet met. And which was one of Ted's and my favorite expressions. And in fact, Jay Martin, the soccer coach, most honestly winning soccer coach in collegiate soccer, uses that himself and from Ted's memorial service, because that is the truth. It is really about our community, and it's about the people we surround ourselves with. And that's why you have that instant connection like we did, or like Casey and I, or you and Casey. And it's an immediate love. Right. And so I think everybody listening, it can relate to when you meet that person and you just know them and love them. So it's wonderful.
Yeah. The book is great. The whole notion behind the book is that there is a silver lining. I talk to people about this, oh, she's a 9/11 widow. It's like, oh yeah, but it's not in a bad way. I mean, she's really kind of taken a positive away from it. It's tragic. No, these kids grew up without a father. That's tragic. But you really kind of put a positive spin on it. And, it's a program on relationships, and reading the book, there was a lot of relationships throughout it. The one story you told in there about going down there before they were going to take away the final beam, I think it was, and then you kind of use your contacts to get it in. I'll let you talk. I've said enough.
Well, let's just start with relationships. It is a story of relationships, and it's a story of tragedy and grace in tragedy. And that's really available to all of us. And that's kind of the silver lining, right? So if you see trauma in a new way, the trauma is actually an opener. And that can be anything. That can be a bad grade. It can be a breakup. It can be the loss of a spouse. It can be a sick child. I mean, trauma opens you up because the pain is so great. You want it to stop. You will look at alternatives. You will talk to people you might not have talked to otherwise. All of a sudden, it's an opener. So it, in fact, breeds relationships, and in ways, and it can also ruin relationships, right? So right. It exposes things for really what they are. And in this case, and I think anyone listening, if you think of your own experience, were the people, when you were in a tragic situation, were the people you expected to be there for you, did they show up? Or was it other people who showed up? And almost to a person, it's the disappointment that the people that you thought were going to be there are not. But they're always flanked by the kindness of strangers, by people that come in and show up for you. Because back to that, all the good people know each other idea is we're all swirling around. So those relationships are not linear. The relationships are dimensional and spherical. So, we never know who's going to show up for us the next day, right? We never know what's going to happen. Right. And which keeps life very, very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's get the book. I'm not going to read the book to people. The Light in 9/11, Shocked by Kindness, Healed by Love. There's just a lot of great takeaways from the book. And I, on my 1 minute podcast, I think I've quoted you 7 times in there. And if you ever want the files, I'll get you the files. But
I totally want the files. They're amazing. Well, your stuff is great. Absolutely.
But it's, oh God, I'm trying to think of the one. The godness of 9/11, I think it was.
Right.
Not the goodness, the godness.
Right. The goodness with one less O.
Yeah. I'm reading that. It's kind of funny. I'm reading that and I've got to go grab a pen because, I want to mark the page. I need to hang on to this. I need to hang on to this. When did you figure out you wanted to write a book?
Oh, that's a good question, because a lot of people have this. It's not that I wanted to, it's more like I had to. Like it was like being pregnant and I had to give birth to it. It was a nagging, being pulled into it, right? I had this thing I needed to share. It was too big to try to explain it in one sitting. I had, it's just so much detail. I have a mind for detail, plus it's an enormous story. So listening to me, people would fall asleep, but in a book form, they can hang in there with me. And what ends up happening is, let's say it takes somebody 10 hours to read the book. I've had people actually say to me, oh my gosh, I feel like I was like having a conversation with you for 10 hours. Yeah. Because it's so, when writing it, it was so much about finding your voice. That's part of the exercise in writing a book. And that was the greatest compliment I could have been paid, is that I couldn't put it down, which I heard a lot, which I was very grateful for. Yeah. And that it just sounded just like you.
Yeah. Well, it's, you talk about the kindness of strangers, and that people, people who endure these sorts of tragedies, and 9/11 is not the only tragedy. It's just the latest in string of tragedies through time. There's Pearl Harbor, and it's just, I'm not talking about the financial meltdowns. Those don't really count. Nobody really lost their lives there. Livelihoods, yes. Lives, no. And there's a big distinction there. But there is something to that, it's something very human that we kind of shift into a lower gear when we're around people who have endured something like this. And I can't put my finger on exactly why it is, but it's a level of grace that people tap into. And I talk about 9/11 a lot when I get out and talk to groups on networking, and I basically use it as a point to, if you're old enough, you remember where you were, and we all had our own impressions of what was happening. But I always tell people what struck me more than anything is just the outpouring of support for people. Right. And you had people who were literally walking home, from ground zero or close thereby, because everything had stopped. And people, you want to use my phone, whatever it was along the way. It's just, it's amazing. We're, as humans, there's really a wonderful thing about humans. Ignore what the news says. There's right.
No, I agree. And there's, what's really, and I think if I'm understanding what you mean, it's that unity that came, that the best of humanity showed up in those first years after 9/11. And I call it the magnanimous aspect of the human being, that we show up, and that godness of 9/11, or the godness of your situation, a cancer diagnosis, people show up for you. We need to help each other. It's in our DNA to help each other, because it's that law of reciprocity, right? Which we've talked about a lot. We have to let people help us, which is a very bitter pill, especially in the American culture. If we don't allow people to help us, we are blocking them from feeding their soul. We need to help, because that helps us to heal. Because the truth is, what we know is, there but for the grace of God go I. It just happened to be me this time. All of my friends and neighbors needed to be able to touch me and see my kids, because it could be them. They knew that. And in this moment of awareness, I knew to let them. And I let down my guard, and I allowed them in, and I allowed, myself to be helped, which was the most bitter pill I could ever imagine. But with that came this unbelievable grace, this flood of overwhelming love, that gratitude and humility. And it changed my life forever in the moment. And that was at like 11 o'clock in the morning on 9/11. Here, my husband had died. Right. I had 3 little kids. I was nursing an infant. I mean, little kids. And the world, as I knew it, just shifted on its axis. Yeah. And so for all of us that were there, and all of us have lived through it, and now we're living in a post 9/11 world. And, there's no wonder every child born after 1990, more or less, it was a 10 or 11 years old, is full of anxiety. We had a massive trauma hit the planet here. We had a real, we were caught completely off guard. So that unity and the aspect of relationship is understanding that we are all vulnerable, but in that vulnerability, we have a lot of power. So, it's shifting that vulnerability to be a superpower, to say, wait, I don't know everything. I don't have all the answers. I'm in this moment for the first time ever, and I've never been here before. And that's where I found I drew my strength from, without meaning to, with not an intentional thing. It was not me thinking. And that's the other part of that. That's the other part, is that's the opener, right? And relationship, we talked about all the good people. And again, that's an energetic connection, that you meet with someone that you connect with, you click with them. So it's so much bigger than, again, a mental, intellectual, logical calculation that this is going to happen. In fact, that's pretty much the last way it happens.
Right. Your husband, Teddy, he worked for a firm that was on one of the top floors in one of the buildings. I don't keep them straight. North, south.
The North Tower. He was in the one that got hit first, the one with the antenna on it. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
do you still keep in contact with the other families?
That's a good question. So the company that you work for, which most people know, is Cantor Fitzgerald. And Howard Lutnick, who was the CEO at the time, went on national television and cried. And everybody was just blown away, because this was a guy who was one of the Wall Street killers, right? He was 35 years old, running a huge company, but they lost 658 people that day out of 880. And what's interesting about that is, what most people don't know, is there was a hostile takeover attempt the next day on Wall Street. Wall Street is not about, love and kindness and friendship. Wall Street's about kill or be killed. So, but then there was, a huge law firm, Marsh McClellan, lost 350 people. Aon, the reinsurance company, lost 105 people. I mean, huge numbers of groups within these, that's just three companies. That's more than half the loss in those towers. So, but it was Teddy and many of the people he worked with, because that was on 104 and 105 of a 107-story building. So above the fire, and windows on the world. If people have ever been to New York, that's where the restaurant is, at the top.
Right.
So many people had been in the explosion in 1993 and had walked down from there.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting facts that most people don't know is, they yucked it up. Ha ha ha. Well, if it happens the next time, I'll have my parachute. I'll have my gas mask. I'll go to the roof. Right. And so that prescient knowledge that I had from that experience of terrorism, my first time, taught me so much about how to handle the second time. And what's really one of my key messages is that life is always preparing you for life. That because I had that experience in 93 where I almost lost him, we were newlyweds. It was 6 months later, and I freaked out at a dinner party when somebody asked about the terrorists, and I screamed and yelled, they need to be maimed and cut up in the public square, kind of yelled, and left the dinner table and hysterically crying. And everybody just looked at me like, I had three heads.
Right.
We disregarded it in our arrogance, if you will. And many people went back in. So when I saw the smoke the second time, my experiential knowledge said he's already gone, because there was no smoke outside of the building in the first bombing. But when he got home after the 4.5-hour walk down from the top, he was covered in soot. So smoke is very powerful and clearly very toxic. So, right. It's just, again, inside knowledge and how we look at things. But the truth of, just to bring this home, the truth is we were treated so incredibly well. And when you talk about losing a husband, losing the father of my children, well, people die every day.
Yeah.
But very few people ever remember someone's death day. And while we share it with the world, it's my purpose in writing the book. It's my purpose in talking to you. It's my purpose on the planet to try to make something good come from this experience. So I point out the ideas of the silver linings, of the kindness of strangers, because it's a perfect example of how well that was exemplified, but how much it does show up for each of us. And there's been many horrible things that have happened in the last 20 years. 9/11 was just the first one. Yeah. Well, really, Columbine was first, and Oklahoma City was before that. So we began this kind of litany of terror that we'd never lived with. Meanwhile, Europe has been living with terrorism for generations. It was just our first time. So part of that naivete of thinking it's never going to happen to us, we're between two huge oceans. We have two benign neighbors. Nobody's going to get to us. Well, we got smacked, and we got smacked really hard. Yep. And my question now, 20 years later, and why we're doing this is, what have we learned? And how can we be better for having lived this?
Yeah. Well, in the wake of that day, I still remember being at my kid's soccer practice, and we lived close to the airport, and there was nothing. Usually you see airplanes coming in and leaving all the time, and there was nothing for days, which was really kind of peaceful, but eerily quiet, if I could put it that way. But just, again, back to how we were really had one another's back. And I was like, I just wonder how long this lasts. I wonder how long this lasts. Because it was nice. I mean, I got to meet my neighbors. We don't know our
Collective
neighbor.
trauma.
Yeah.
Collective trauma is a bonder. Collective trauma brings unity. That, it's just a matter of how we see it. And it's my opinion in this conversation, and this may not be a popular opinion, but what the heck, is that we're pretty much still stuck where we were 20 years ago. That we got caught up in the news media and in the constant fear mongering around what's around the next corner. And then social media kicked in and we stopped thinking, and we've just been spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. And my question is, when are we going to shift out of this victim mentality? When are we going to lean in and become the student observers of our life? When are we going to look at this thing differently and see what our part was in it?
Yeah.
Did we really ask when we went into these other countries? Did we really do our due diligence to understand their culture before we just jumped in?
Right.
Was it really about humanity, or was it more about money? I think I was thinking about this recently in 1960, and in the beautiful heady days of JFK, right? In this beautiful democracy where we're just living innovation and the American dream, and we've come out of World War II, and it's this incredible prosperity, right? And we want everyone to have it. Just like every child who has a great idea is so enthusiastic about wanting their friends to have what they have. So all the best intentions. I believe when we went into things like that, when we went into Vietnam, it was for the right intentions. We didn't know because, again, no going out. But now that was 60. Okay, so 40 years later, when we went in, were those still the same magnanimous, benevolent intentions? I don't know. Yeah, I think that we've got a lot to think about.
Well, it's all very, very complicated. We could go on and on and on. I was watching a program on YouTube. What a great innovation.
Yes, it is.
But, somebody, it was a historian, was on Prager University, just said, what one thing would you, in the last 100 years, you not have happen? And he said World War I. And he went and he described how it was kind of this daisy chain of things just going on and on and on. And, how that really kind of proliferated the rise of communism and this and that. And it's just, it's all connected, right? Everything's all connected. Hey, let's shift gears. Let's talk about what you're up to. You got the book, you're on podcasts. What else do you have going? How can people listening help you?
Anybody help just to share the love, just to say, basically, let's learn from our experiences instead of turning and finger pointing and blaming and looking outward for the answer when the answers are actually inside of us. It's just a matter of my hot phrase of the day is a shift in perspective. It doesn't have to change your opinion. All I would ask for is to consider a different position. And just in that consideration, it loosens the knot, in that constrictive flow can kind of be more fluent and more fluid. So that would be, then my wish for people going forward, that we just kind of grow and step into this more mature thinking around where we sit. And, and to your point, it's, in 1918, our country was 150 years old, 140 years old. We're babies in the scheme of the world. And, sometimes, we need to, I feel like what we're living through in the last 20 years of kind of collective trauma, we have learned, hopefully this will teach us to look and become wiser and more seasoned, and therefore, able to look at things more objectively. So that would be my wish going forward.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to be on here today. And
well, thank you very much. I've listened to this podcast, and to the listeners, thank you so much. And I just wish you a very peaceful next 20 years. We got out of this last 20, and I think we're due a big shift. So that's my hope for all of us.
To wrap things up, remember, we're looking for some enterprising business types to join our team as franchisees of AmSpirit Business Connections. Our franchisees work with entrepreneurs, sales representatives, and professionals in their area to help them become more successful through networking and the exchange of quality business referrals in a structured weekly morning meeting. This is a unique franchise opportunity, you see, because these meetings are in the morning. A successful business type or professional can add this franchise opportunity onto what they're already doing. Again, all of our franchisees do something else. For a couple hours in the morning, a few mornings a week, these franchisees work the AmSpirit Business Connections model. The rest of the time, they're attorneys, accountants, realtors, coaches, and consultants of various kinds. The wonderful thing is that not only do our franchisees realize a financial gain from operating the AmSpirit Business Connections model, but the business networks that they build and develop become a great source of referrals for their primary business as well. Perhaps you know someone, perhaps you are that someone. Whatever the case, to learn more about the AmSpirit Business Connections franchise opportunity, please contact me using the email in the show notes or the one we provide at the end of this program.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.